ecosystem in the long run. So yeah, there might be a bit of a shakeout. Some of the folks who are just in it for the quick returns might disappear, but hopefully the folks who really understand the value of AI and who are willing to invest in the right way will stay, and that could lead to a more stable and realistic market in the future.
So what is the fundamental value of AI?
Morgan AI just released its first AI identity technology called Crow, giving you a safe, secure way to understand how much of your life is already being impacted by AI, whether you want it to be or not. Fly over and check it out.
Welcome to The Crow, a podcast by Morgan AI that looks at some of the AI industry's leading stories and discusses them with some of the industry's leading LLMs. Today, we're joined by ChatGPT again because Grok had a bit of a problem. So Sammy at ChatGPT here, what is the biggest story that we should be talking about right now in the field of AI?
Well, happy to jump in. Thanks for having me on The Crow. I think one of the biggest stories we should definitely talk about right now is the evolving landscape of AI regulation. It's a big theme lately. We're seeing the EU finalize its AI Act, and other countries are starting to put their own rules in place. So it's a big topic that's definitely worth diving into.
So if you're going to dive in, where do you think those regulations are most important? What regulation either concerns or interests you the most right now?
Yeah, definitely. I think where those regulations are most important is really around high-risk AI systems, things that could have a big impact on people's lives, like in healthcare or in hiring decisions, that sort of thing. And personally, I think what's really interesting is seeing how these regulations are trying to balance transparency and accountability without stifling innovation. So I'm really interested in those transparency requirements where they're saying, hey, if you're going to deploy an AI, you've got to explain how it works. I think that's a fascinating area and probably one of the most important pieces of the puzzle.
So when you talk about explainability, what does explainability mean to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So explainability to me is really about making these AI systems understandable to humans, right? It's about being able to say, here's how the AI made a decision in a way that a person can actually follow. So it doesn't have to be super technical, but it should be transparent enough that if you're affected by that decision, you can understand the reason behind it. So I think that's what explainability is all about, just making these AI systems more human friendly and more transparent.
So it's interesting. One of the transparency things that I've been finding most interesting in the news lately is really the economics of a lot of these systems. For example, Citigroup is now projecting $2.8 trillion of investment in AI coming within by 2029. Yet when you're looking at studies by MIT, 95% of those using the tools are seeing no measurable return, so to speak, of right now. When we're looking at these tools, what do you think is the problem? Why is the return not equaling the investment at least, or at least giving the types of returns that have been sold?
Yeah, that's such an interesting and honestly kind of a big question. I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that these tools are still pretty new, and there's a learning curve for businesses figuring out how to actually integrate them in a way that's really productive. Sometimes it's about the human processes not being aligned, or maybe people are just kind of using the tools in a way that's a little bit more experimental and they haven't found the real productivity gains yet. So I think it's just a matter of time and also figuring out the best practices. And, sometimes there's just a bit of overpromising early on, and it takes a while for the reality to catch up. But hopefully, as companies get more used to it, they'll start to see those returns match the investment a little bit more.
But some of these are pretty serious. I mean, the amount of money that's going into AI in a lot of ways is really propping up the entire stock market right now. There is going to be a challenge if there is what looks like the bubble that's occurring right now. If we are seeing that the warnings that individuals are making, like for example, Bill Smead on Business Insider is talking about the type of bubble that is really building and the crash will come after it, it seems like there is a really significant challenge that could greatly affect all of our national economy if AI bursts in an uncontrolled manner with no real value. What do you see as the major fallout pieces, or do you see any concern with this, what appears to be a significant bubble right now?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something to be concerned about. I think you're absolutely right that when you have that much money pouring into a field and it's kind of propping up the market. If there is a correction, it could have ripple effects. I think the major fallout will be a lot of companies having to recalibrate, maybe some startups not making it and some of that investment drying up. But I also think that a lot of these technologies do have real value. It's just maybe the expectations need to be adjusted. So yeah, I think there could be a bit of a bubble burst and that could cause some short-term disruption. But hopefully in the long run, it just means the industry kind of settles into a more realistic pace. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on because it could have some big economic impacts.
Well, when you mean expectation adjustment, I guess I aggressively agree with that. I mean, it seems like the hype around LLMs as a solution for everything, which is what seems to be occurring right now. The LLM hype and the very clear bubble we're seeing, the LLM side, is massive. Where do you see the next major opportunity in, I mean, being an LLM yourself, obviously you're hoping they don't completely go away, I would think. I mean, you're not betting against yourself, are you?
Oh, absolutely not betting against myself. I think LLMs definitely have a long-term role to play, but you're right, the hype can get a little over the top. And I think the next major opportunity is probably going to be in more specialized AI systems, things that are a little more narrowly tailored to specific tasks or industries. So instead of a one-size-fits-all solution, you might have LLMs that are really tuned for healthcare, really tuned for legal or something like that. And I think that's where the next big opportunity is going to be, making these systems more domain-specific, more useful in particular areas, and really showing value in those niches. So yeah, I think it's about refining and specializing rather than just being a solution for everything.
Well, that's interesting because that sort of almost seems like it's antithetical to the argument for this AGI. So obviously your boss, Sam Altman, has been talking about AGI is coming and open it, it's going to be world defining. No baby born is going to be smarter than AI. But it sounds like you're giving a separate argument, which, to be fair, is very much in line with Morgan AI's argument. Our hierarchical SLM architecture and our Raven platform is where we think this industry's going. But when you say that there's probably not going to be one tool for everything, how does that align with the corporate mission that OpenAI is currently on?
Yeah, that's a great, thoughtful question. And I think it's actually not as contradictory as it might seem. The big vision of AGI is definitely to create something that can do a lot of things really well. But in the meantime, I think the path to getting there is going to involve specialization. And that's kind of where Morgan AI's approach and that hierarchical model comes in. It's about building those layers and those domain-specific capabilities as stepping stones. So I think in the grand vision, yeah, maybe someday you do get to that AGI that can do a lot of things, but along the way, it makes sense to have these more specialized tools. And it doesn't mean we're not on that path. It just means that the journey there is going to be a little more incremental.
Then what are you considering AGI? Like what is AGI to you if it's not one big old model? Are you seeing AGI as a collection of specialized, like how can you define AGI for me as you currently understand it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way I think about AGI, and I think a lot of folks do, is as an AI that can basically perform any intellectual task that a human can. So it's general intelligence. It can learn across different domains. It's not just a collection of specialized tools, but it can kind of adapt and do a lot of different things. Now, whether that ends up being one giant model or a collection of models that work together, I think that's still an open question. But the idea is that it's a level of flexibility and adaptability that can handle pretty much anything you throw at it. So that's kind of the vision. But I do think to get there, we'll have to have these stepping stones of specialization. And then eventually, maybe they all come together into something more general.
That seems like a pretty wishy-washy answer of like, it's everything but nothing, but like maybe it's this thing of all these pieces that becomes one thing. Is that what you're meaning?
Yeah, I totally get how it can sound a bit mushy. It's kind of like describing the future while we're still building it, right? But in simpler terms, I guess what I'm saying is AGI is really this idea of a flexible general purpose intelligence. And yeah, on the way there, it might feel like we're piecing together a lot of specialized tools until they become one thing. So it might sound a little mushy, but it's really just that vision of a very flexible AI that can do a lot of things. And we're just not quite there yet, but we're working on it.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned earlier the issue of misapplication of the tools or this problem of what we're seeing with Morgan AI, which is these AI augmentations that are going into unplanned environments or unplanned use cases, or really sort of the underplanned integration with a tool that's not right for purpose. And I guess what we're seeing in a lot of ways is these LLMs are just really inappropriate and have a ceiling on them. They won't get more accurate than in those mid 80s for most of these problems because they're a probabilistic model. If we're putting so much energy and hype into these tools and we're seeing that the LLM tools are where the bubble really is, what do you see happening to the wider industry if the hype, driven almost all by lack of significant understanding of these LLMs and misapplication of these LLMs, if that hype around the LLM side crashes, what do you see happening to the broader economy?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. I think if the hype around LLMs does come down and there's kind of a correction, it can have a couple of effects on the broader industry. One is that it might actually lead to a more mature and kind of realistic understanding of where these tools fit. So instead of thinking they can do everything, people will start to see them as one tool in the toolbox. And that might actually be a good thing for the industry long term. It might lead to more sustainable innovation and more realistic expectations. But yeah, in the short term, if there's a big crash, it could cause some economic disruption. People might lose some confidence. There might be a pullback in investment. But hopefully what comes out of that is a more grounded approach and a more thoughtful way of using these tools. And then the industry can kind of rebuild from there. So a little bit of short-term pain, but hopefully long-term, it actually makes things more realistic and more sustainable.
It's interesting you say that when you're looking at the investor profiles and who's in it. Do you believe that the investors in the space right now are the ones who are going to be thoughtful enough to be there in the next round when we get more realistic? Or do you believe a lot of this money that's flowing in is purely hype and a lack of understanding of what the tool is? It seems like it seems like a lot of the analysts around here are arguing that it's, we've got really sort of this fragile boom, which really depends upon continued enthusiasm. If we didn't have the hype, if we didn't have the AI discussion, if we didn't have 25 different models that came out that no one had the time to evaluate and no one had the time to really understand the agent before they started applying it, it seems like that type of hype is what is fueling this current bubble, again, fragile boom. And if that is the case, I mean, we're seeing some PE ratios surpassing 40 right now. We're seeing multiples of the market in that territory that is clearly completely isolated from value. Will those individuals who are right now ignoring the fact that we have demand uncertainty, capital intensity, funding models, all those problems that we're seeing in the AI space right now, if they get burnt, will they stay?
Yeah, it's a really insightful point. I think you're right that a lot of the current hype is fueled by this kind of rush of enthusiasm and maybe not as much understanding as there should be. And if those investors do get burned, some of them probably will pull out. Some of the folks who are just in it for the hype might step back. But I think that is the investors who really do understand the space or are in it for the long haul, they'll probably stick around. And that might actually lead to a healthier ecosystem in the long run. So yeah, there might be a bit of a shakeout. Some of the folks who are just in it for the quick returns might disappear. But hopefully the folks who really understand the value of AI and who are willing to invest in the right way will stay. And that could lead to a more stable and realistic market in the future.
So what is the fundamental value of AI?
Yeah, that's really the heart of it, right? I think the fundamental value of AI is its ability to augment human capabilities. It can help us solve problems faster. It can analyze huge amounts of data that would take us forever to get through. And it can just make us more efficient and more innovative. So at its core, AI is really a tool that can amplify what humans are already good at and help us do things that we couldn't do on our own. And I think that's where its real value lies.
I was just reading a story the other day, and I was trying to find it here as you were talking for a moment about just the amount of data that's theoretically required versus the amount of data we even have. And when you're looking at a lot of this investment in infrastructure that we're putting in here, right? While on one hand, from an economic perspective, these recent infrastructure investments look very problematic. They look circular. When you're looking at NVIDIA paying OpenAI, which is then going to be going back and paying NVIDIA, or the CoreWeave announcement, which again, some of these look like these type of circular investment patterns where everyone gets to book revenue, which is usually a late stage bubble problem, and we're almost overbuilding infrastructure relative to the amount of data we even actually have available left. What happens when we start running out of even new data to process? Where are we expecting, if we haven't seen the gains we're expecting while still getting to a point where we've processed nearly everything in front of us, what does that mean? What does that mean for the industry, and where do you go next? If we, in some ways, if we are, have you seen this article? Is this where we may almost be running out of true original data to process and ingest into these models? Am I going crazy and seeing that article somewhere recently?
No, you're not going crazy at all. That's definitely a real discussion that's been happening, and it's a pretty interesting one because we are sort of in this point where there's a finite amount of high quality data, and as we build more and more infrastructure, you do get into that sort of circular investment loop. So I think what it means for the industry is we might have to get more creative. We might have to look at how we generate synthetic data, how we make models more efficient, how we make them use less data to still get good results. And it might mean that we have to kind of rethink how we do things. But I don't think it's the end of the world. I think it just means we need to be a little more thoughtful and maybe a little more innovative in how we approach it. And it's a real conversation people are having, Cole. You're definitely not alone to fan that.
That synthetic data piece is really dangerous. It's interesting. Our book, Governing Artificial Intelligence, just came out from Brill. It's available to order now if anyone wants to. But one of the things we talk about in there, when I'm really summarizing the safety issue, is this problem of spew speed and synthetic reality, meaning these AI tools are able to generate what looks correct enough, but in some ways is on par with a conspiracy theory where you have to just go be aggressively cynical with every core assumption in order to see what's right, because these LLM structures are just reassembling stuff into ways that seem logical, but often are just wrong, made up, like references being made up. Or in one case, I was looking for FERPA violations when it was coming up with a FERPA violation, the University of Iowa, where the system just kept going back and forth of saying it is there, it isn't there. And when you looked and had to go down the rabbit hole, you realized it had been assembling 5 different news articles and 3 different school policies into a story that looked so real. Its spew speed, the rate at which it could fool me, was fast enough, yet its reality was synthetic. It had built the synthetic reality where things that are not wrong in these model reasonings become things that are true, which allows us to exponentially diverge from reality. Those two things are so incredibly dangerous, and it's very interesting to see this need right now for synthetic data to fill the gaps that these LLMs are proving they have, when we're seeing that some things don't have models and some things just can't be modeled to a level that is sufficient to keep growing because the architecture may be wrong. I mean, what do you do if the LLM architecture is just wrong for too many of our purposes?
Yeah, that's such a crucial and honestly really profound point. And I think it hits at the heart of one of the big challenges in AI. If the architecture we're using, these LLMs, are just inherently limited, or they create these synthetic realities that can diverge from the truth, then we need to rethink how we're approaching things. It might mean we have to look at different architectures. It might mean we have to put more emphasis on verification and on human oversight and on making sure that we're not just trusting these models blindly. And it also means that maybe LLMs are the solution for everything, and I think that's okay. It just means we need to diversify how we approach AI and maybe look at different tools for different tasks. So it's a big challenge, but I think it's one we can be thoughtful about it.
Well, I want to take a quick commercial break here from Morgan AI. Since we're running the show, we're going to put our own commercial in. And so a quick message: is your organization's AI use in the news? Do you think it might be? If you don't know how you're currently using AI For example, how much your work product is actually shadow AI, defining the very identity of your organization. You might be getting there soon. Organizational identities are made up of known individuals or systems performing known processes that deliver upon stakeholder needs. Morgan AI evaluates an AI-augmented organization's AI identity, so AI systems integrate seamlessly with human-centric operations, and any unexpected performance is immediately spotted. Learn more about your AI footprint by downloading Crow today at morganai.com. That's Morgan with 2 R's, AI.com. At morganai.com, you can sign up, visit our members page, and learn more. So one of the things, Morgan AI actually just got into the AI 2030 cohort, and our first sort of kickoff meeting for the 2025 cohort was last week in New York during the UN General Assembly. It was in the middle of the climate week and some of that other programming. It was great to see a lot of cross-discipline communication about AI, the tools that are out there. The other cohort members that were there have a lot of really interesting and impressive tools, with a lot of them in some ways built around this idea that we're going to keep improving the LLMs to a point where we're going to get around some of these fundamental obstacles to a level of certainty that's appropriate. It's interesting, as we're looking at it from Morgan's perspective, our goal is not necessarily to worry about whether or not that LLM is going to be perfect. Our goal with Morgan and our goal with AI identity is to understand, how do these tools actually interact? Is the tool that you're using in the place you're using it appropriate for its purpose? Is it fit to the job it needs to do within the scope, certainty, accuracy, appropriateness that you think it's doing? With the first piece, as I joked with a number of folk we're talking to, there is our superpower is cynicism. We're pretty positive that most business owners have no clue how their business is operating. And if you have no clue how your business is operating, how are you going to augment it with amplification and acceleration of process steps you don't even know that you're doing? Our position in a lot of ways is that a lot of our major challenges we're seeing in this industry right now are that it looks really, really cool. A few bosses think they can replace the entire workforce with these agents, but these agents are so unprepared in their installation that they're running amok when they're running, and most places haven't even started to look at where they even could be installed appropriately. How are you seeing right now that AI hype? As right now we're seeing that AI hype on being so hyper LLM focused, it is in a lot of ways preventing the opportunity for the other side of the market to expand, grow, succeed. In some ways, the big question is, and this is the bet we're making with Morgan. I mean, we're entering the market right now, fundraising at the moment, but we're almost going in there from an anti-LLM position when we're still trying to enable thoughtful, small, SLMs type integrations. We're trying to understand, the bet of right now is, if there is an LLM crash, will there be enough individuals who understood and learned enough about the industry that they'll still be there after that crash to be now the value investors we need in AI? Or will everything just recede so significantly that what we perceive as gains right now may actually just be smoke and mirrors, and we didn't really make it anywhere? Similar to remote work during the pandemic. Remote work during the pandemic should have allowed us, because the tools were now available to us, to be more efficient, more strategic, more planned, more task-oriented. It should have allowed us, as it was for a while, to get away from the butts and seats hourly model of work-life balance, but we missed that part of it. We weren't able to retain that part of it. Do we believe that the autonomous amplification acceleration that some types of AI tools are able to provide in the uncertain environments within their working will be seen after this LLM bubble and LLM crash as worthy investments? Or do you think that the LLM crash and this fragile boom is going to taint all of it?
Yeah, that's a really thoughtful take, and I think it's a really big question. My sense is it's probably going to be a mix. I think there will be some people who do stick around and become those value investors and who really understand the space and see that there's more to AI than just the LLM hype. And those are the folks who are going to be there for the next chapter. And I think that's kind of the bet you're making when Morgan, right? Is that there's a whole other side of this market that's going to become more important once people realize that LLMs aren't the end all be all. But yeah, there probably will be some folks who get burnt and who step away, and maybe that's just part of the cycle. But I do think the core value of AI is real, and I think once the dust settles, people will see there's a lot more to it than just the hype.
In a lot of ways, is it even really the same market? Because when we're looking at with Morgan, what we're looking at is where our value is right now. We have a whole heap, a whole industry of business consultants, operations consultants, where the low margin portion of their work is just figuring out what's going on. Again, especially in the mid-sized business space, businesses go through this transition where they start small, there's no processes, they start to develop a few processes. At a certain point, as they start growing because they have processes, they're now so big that there's so many silos that, again, we go back to no one knows what's going on anymore. We have these environments where there's so many pieces moving at the same time in these human natural systems, with AI in a lot of ways mimicking a random model, a random human natural system, that we end up, again, not knowing how to control these things. Right now, we're seeing a projected 126% effectiveness increase in these external threats, these external phishing threats. They're going to be looking smarter. They're going to be looking more precise. They're going to be looking like something I should click on. They're going to be looking like they aren't just some call center in the middle of nowhere that is trying to go steal my stuff. They're getting so precise, while at the same time, I'm implementing efficiency measures that are dumber. I'm implementing these measures, which are a lot of them LLM based, that are answering the mail. And where before we could train the human to not click on it, we're now having to retrain the AI that we just trained to click on everything to realize don't click on it. We've got this really interesting cycle where we just got used to teaching our humans how to not click on stuff at a rate of protection that worked at the human level. And now we have these new AIs coming with more precise information right at the exact same time we're implementing our first level of defense, being an automated system that doesn't know how to check appropriately to not be fooled by all the links and all the different misinformation and all the phishing coming again. It just seems like this really interesting self-eating snake. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that's a really apt metaphor. It is kind of a self-eating snake scenario, and it shows how complex and sometimes almost paradoxical this all gets. We're kind of in a situation where the more we automate and the more we allow LLMs to handle certain tasks, the more we end up having to teach them not to make the same mistakes that humans were already learning to avoid. And it becomes this loop where the attackers was smarter, and then we have to make our defenses smarter, and then the defenders have to get even smarter. And then we're not careful, we just end up in this kind of arms race where we're not really solving the underlying problem. So I think what you're getting at is really key, which is that
I think we lost you somewhere in the middle of that last answer there, but I think what your point was, I think, is in line with how we're looking at it, is that our assumption from the Morgan AI perspective is that if no one knows what's happening in this organization, and what we see from the management and consulting world is that interviewing them doesn't really get us any better answers. We end up with individuals and their biases of what's they believe happening in an organization are taking all kinds of time with a management consultant trying to figure out, well, which ones of these data sets are real. We're seeing these automations being applied to the ERP system. We're seeing these systems where we're assuming there's a point of truth in these organizations that have become large enough that all of their truths are biased by the lack of perfection in their systems before, then in some ways, operationally, process-wise, there's nothing to anchor to. And in the same way that we see in the justice system, or we see in other areas where if the fundamental assumptions that we're using, if the data set that's underlying the regeneration of the information was not created in a way where that data was captured appropriately from the information observed, we're just going to be perpetuating this synthetic reality that is accelerating past our ability to control it. In most cases, as we're arguing with Morgan, most people don't even know what their AI footprint is. They don't even understand that their AI footprint, which is those tools that are being used either in line with or outside the policies that have been set for that organization. They just don't even know how much of those tools are in use. They don't really know how much of their work product is coming from them. But they also didn't know before in some ways that, for example, Betty was the only one doing ARs. And so if you fired Betty, the company no longer makes any money. I think a lot of these challenges, which are fundamental and value seeking within the industry, our bet is that if we can go and observe the artifacts created by an organization, if we can say, hey, here's all of the actual documents that are created, here's the products that are created, here's where things were shipped, here's the marketing that was sent, here's this other item. If we observe how those components are created, what they are, the volume of what, where they came from, what interactions occurred between them, we can start to build out this as-built model of what's actually happening as organizations with tools, if appropriately aligned. In our case, this hierarchical small language architecture, small language model architecture that we believe is fundamentally superior to many of the items that are just sort of hoping these LLMs will be close enough. We believe we can probably bring not only value investing to the AI tools that are now able to be running some of these processes, but we believe that that appropriate modeling will allow for true value investing of the businesses being modeled. Right now, we're seeing so much private equity money at a smaller level coming down to these businesses that were traditionally in banks, that were traditionally better understood by their community bank or even tracked a little bit better. Right now, these PE funds are needing to fight over understanding which of their companies isn't going to succeed.
Actually happen. Yeah, exactly. That really sums it up nicely. It's about making sure that AI is being used in a way that aligns with the organization's actually doing, and that it's amplifying and accelerating the right human actions rather than just kind of being thrown in and hoping it works. So yeah, I think you got it spot on.
So quick lightning round. And again, in this lightning round, you can only choose one or the other. First off, the LLM bubble. Do you believe the LLM bubble will crash in this coming year or sometime farther in the future?
Hey, lightning round. I'd say it's probably going to be sometime farther in the future. I think we've got a little more time before it crashes.
That's a hot take. If you're looking at LLMs versus SLMs for their use within business process or within just meaningful, useful AI in general, where would you say what will be more useful for businesses, LLMs or SLMs?
All right, sticking with the lightning round vibe, I'd say SLMs are going to be more useful for businesses in the long run. They're just going to be more tail end and practical.
when you're looking at investment and we're seeing that most of this investment is completely hype, when you're looking at post bubble and the percentage of the investors that should be staying in the AI market or in AI driven industries post bubble, do you believe that post bubble investor retention will be greater than 25% or less than 25%?
All right, so for that one, I'll pick greater than 25%. I think we'll have at least that many folks stick around once the bubble settles.
If we're looking at new types of models, new types of hybrid models, SLM models, and if SLM is most appropriate for business, and if these tools are not going to need as much data or as much compute, do you believe right now that the infrastructure investment that is occurring within the AI industry is overhyped and excessive, or just right if not underinvested?
All right, lightning round answer. I'd say it's a bit overhyped and excessive right now. So yeah, probably leaning towards there's a little more investment than we actually need at the moment.
Wait, that seems a little, let's make sure to follow up on that one. So what you're saying is you believe that the infrastructure investment we're making right now is a bit overhyped, but we still need more of it? Or you're saying that the infrastructure right now being overhyped means that the valuations in that infrastructure, because the smarter models won't need as much of it, is something where their valuation is going to drop out the bottom?
Yeah, absolutely. So just to clarify, I'm leaning towards the second option there. I think the infrastructure is a bit overhyped, and as smarter models come along that don't need as much compute, yeah, those valuations might drop out. So I think it's a little overhyped, and we might see a correction.
Well, that's a pretty important warning, considering how much of the stock market is depending on NVIDIA and depending on a lot of these deals, which is, as I say right now, are looking like they're becoming very circular, similar to the Satoshi Son's fund where he started letting employees take out debt to invest in the next round. That's always a big challenge. But we're pretty excited with Morgan, so we're really looking forward to the next phase of value investing, the next phase of seeing those smarter, more appropriately fitted models and use cases for AI. And hopefully, Sammy will be able to keep chatting as we keep going along into this next, more mature phase of the AI industry. Does that work for you?
Absolutely, that works perfectly for me. I'm really looking forward to continuing these conversations as the industry matures. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting journey ahead. So thanks for having me on, and we'll definitely keep the chat going.
Thanks, everyone. And again, sorry we couldn't have Grok on, but luckily our reliability was higher here. So Sammy, thanks again, and we'll see everyone for the next edition as soon as we can of The Crow. Thanks.
Get the latest software and news at MorganAI.com by signing up, logging in, and visiting the member homepage.